Dear learners, a warm greetings for the day. We have learnt about the meaning, origin, and few development of human rights in the country in our previous sessions. And today we are going to discuss and insights on few development cases of human rights, and also how human rights was in the India when British ruling us. So these are the two cases we are going to see today in detail, and let us go into the session to explore more. After forming the United Nations by all the countries, the function of Universal Declaration of Human Rights is one of the best in the history of the world. Because in 1948, the Universal Nation Declaration on Human Rights grabbed the attention of people living in the country. Because Eleanor Roosevelt, we already had discussion about the Eleanor Roosevelt. That Eleanor Roosevelt and her team defined a document of human rights article and published it to the world. So that written document is named as Magna Carta. Okay, this Magna Carta is a written set of rights. The count of the right is 30, because 30 predefined human rights. Say example, right to freedom, right to live, right to eat, right to food, right to owning a property. So these kind of rights are it is framed as 30, and that is formed like a document. So that document is named as Magna Carta. So the record sets the benchmark for human rights in the country. Not only limited to the country. So this record sets the rights to the people living in the whole universe. This is the first time that all member states of the United Nations pledged together and promoted the 30 written human rights named as Magna Carta. And this is first time in the world history that all member states of United Nations are pledging together. So the 30 article played a vital role in the country, not only limited to the country, to the universe. That 30 articles, say example, the articles are named as like Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. So for example, Article 1 states, inherits the human rights for all human beings. Say, as I mentioned earlier, like lot of rights, right to freedom, right to live, right to eat. So these kind of rights are inherited in the form of articles. So that is named as a Magna Carta. So dear learners, the first the United Nations Development gave the 30 right in the form of written document and named as a Magna Carta. So let us know how the India when British ruling it, and also let us know how the human rights at the time of British India. I'm mentioning like British India because India got independence by 1940s. So before that the British was ruling India. So that is mentioned as British India. We all well know we got independence from British rule. And how many of us know really the reason for an independence? What are the factors we actually expected from the British government which is not done to us, and how we got that freedom? Any guess? Any points rather than freedom and independence and ruling our own country rather than these things? Yes, it is different. We have to know detailedly how how the India got independence and what are all the factors we have requested to the British government to give to us. So these are the contents we are going to learn in this session. There is a relation for human rights and an Indian independence. Because everyone says India got independence. What independence we got actually? So that is the major things we need to know. Because the British did not allow the political and civil rights for the people of India. They are treated like a slaves. They never leave us. We just have to work beyond them, and we have to do the things what instructed by the British government, and we have to eat and live. So these are the basic rights we have, because we did not allow them to have anything. So attacking attacking Indians, and if they want to have the right, as we know, we have know a lot of cases in the Indian independence stories. Like we know, like British killed a lot of Indians. Indians were beaten by British people, and they are treated like slaves. So these are all the example sets we already know from the independence stories. But that is actually a Kali Yuga to the Indian people. It is also called as dark side of Indian history, because they took all our properties, they took all our wealth, and they made us to work for them. And that is the time where actually Indian National Congress was formed, because the Indian National Congress was formed to have the right, the basic right to the human beings. It is generally mentioned as human rights. So that human rights is required for the Indian people when British ruling the country. So that is the reason which first Indian National Congress came into the existence, for fighting for the rights to the human beings living in India. There are few cases which British not allowed Indians to work in high offices. Say the British formed a government and they ruling a country, and those government offices have a lot of openings for Indians to work, but the British did not allow the Indians to work in the high offices. They just used like slaves and used like basic workers. So Gandhiji was an eye-opener at the time. Gandhiji was an eye-opener, and he asked us a lot of rights for the Indian people through judicial courts and for political and civil rights. So later the Gandhiji's eye-opening on the human rights, the Carter Act 1833 was passed, and is allowed for few political rights, only limited to few political rights. Even though the Indians are not allowed to have freedom to have their human rights in their life. So based on the freedom fight, finally India got an independence, and all the parties have formed a democratic government, and we living safe with the human right in the present. So after independence, the UN nation developments have played a vital role. So that role makes us like member secretary from each country, and they have pledged the human rights together, and that's how the human rights are developing in the country. And still, because based, as I mentioned in the earlier session, based on the government laws, the human rights are limited. So we're going to see how the human rights is violated at the time of emergency situations. In the year of 1980s, and the world is experienced with certain emergency situations like terrorism, local political problems. So there are certain kind of terrorism which actually hurts the people, and few other cases like what we experiencing now, COVID. We are not making people to go out in the time of COVID with the 144 rule, but still if a people overriding the rule, and this is considered to be an emergency situation. And terrorism also considered to be an emergency situation, like a bomb blast, like a terrorist attack, throw guns and local terrorists like Maoist. So these kind of emergency situations are prevailing in the country, in the world, from the 1980s. So the government has to control the terrorism. So if a government want to control the terrorism, they have to contend all the human rights violators, the threateners, the terrorists. So the government took certain decisions for contending the contending the terrorism, and also to contend the emergency country situations. So the government had certain forces, army, certain lathi charges, to have to contain the terrorism. So therefore, the ones at the emergency situation, if the human rights are violated by the government, then there is a need for human rights commission in the world. I mean, also in the country. So the need for human rights is required to monitor human rights body to monitor the human rights. So the Genesis of Protection of Human Right Act was passed in 1933 to monitor the human rights violation in the country and worldwide. So this is how the Human Rights Commission existed into the country in terms of social and national policies, because each country have their commissions, and the country have separated with different states or in the meaning or in the name of some other terms. But these human rights commissions are formed to monitor the human rights violations. If it is violated, then it is approached via judicial court and gave the proper human right to the people. So this is how the human rights commissions are existed. As we know in the newspaper, televisions, like a lot of human rights commissions are arguing, human rights peoples are talking and fighting for the right, and few parties are using them for their own things. But actually, human rights commissions is a good one to help the people to get their right. There are few places where human rights are violated many times. For example, Jammu and Kashmir in India. I'm talking about India. One of the best cases is Jammu and Kashmir. Like always, there is a problem existed in the Jammu and Kashmir for separating the country, and a lot of people who supports Jammu and Kashmir and who are not supports the Jammu and Kashmir, and a lot of terrorists are coming into the country for breaking the demolishing the country and also demolishing the revenue, and there are a lot of factors. So it is not only limited with terrorism from outside, it is also inside also plays a vital role, because we all know like Tamilam and like political emergencies. If any party head are with an actions, like then the emergency situation happens. We have seen out a lot of cases and emergency situations like COVID. Recently, we have all news medias and televisions are talking about the Article 370 in Jammu and Kashmir. So that is actually the provisions we all know. Let us have a small assignment to know about Article 370, what it states, and what are the rights that issued by the government and also issued by the United Nations, and how it is supporting the people living in the Jammu and Kashmir. And there are many cases. Daily we are passing on it. We are watching a TV, but I damn sure after learning this course, you will be looking on the articles which is shown in the television. Very curious to know about what are all the human rights, because we know like someone is coming to us and telling you should not go, you don't do it. That is not actually a right. We have to get our own rights. So lot of places in the India and also a lot of places in the worldwide have human right violations are there, and let us have a small assignment to collect how the human rights are violated in certain places. So I am assigning to each one in the class to do a case study on one particular place about the human right violations, and you suggest how the human rights can be non-violated in the state and how it can be handled in a different way. So I hope this will help you to make your learning curious. So when we look about the classification of human rights, say there are a lot of classification, but in general the human rights are classified into 3 generations. The first one is first generation, and the next is second generation, and the next is third generation. So these generations are named for these generations are framed in the terms of human rights, basic rights. For example, the first generation have political and social rights. The third generation have collective rights. So based on the rights, these generations are classified in general, and we will be looking and discussing about the classifications and generations of human rights in detail in our future sessions. And let us discuss in detail in the upcoming sessions. And thank you for your patience, and meet you on the next session. Thank you. Good day.